Okay, so now that we are all settled, if I could ask everyone to take their seats, and I hope the folks online are there. If the folks online want to put their cameras on, this is the last session of our workshop series. If you want to put your cameras on so that the folks in the room could see who you are, that would be great. Let me swing our computer camera around too so you could see everyone. There we are, a lot of shy people, a lot of camera shy people, but I hope you all will turn on the cameras. We know, I call it the pajama time. It's okay. We just need your face. So this session is really more about you than it is about me. I asked yesterday, if you all could take some time to think about what do you think we need to do? Here we are, a group. We represent the Caribbean region. We've had so many discussions on disaster risk reduction. We've learned so many things. And we want to know what the next steps should be out of this. So we're going to really talk about the key learnings, the key takeaways, and also your ideas for what you think we need to do in two ways: what we need to do as individuals, and secondly, as organizations. Maybe I can add a third to that, what we need to do as a group. CBU is represented here, MIC is represented here. So I'm going to move around with the microphone. And to those of you online, just raise your hands, and so I'll know to come to you. And we're going to start in the room.
Hello, everybody. Again, it's me, Kimberly. What are we going to do? As an individual, for myself, is to continuously learn about the changing impacts that we're facing in disaster risk reduction and management, or crisis and response. For my community, it's about revamping my radio station to bring awareness to my small community in Western St. Mary about preparedness and crisis management and response. Personally, again, it's also to teach my little cousins about preparedness and crisis and disaster and epidemic and pandemic. As a group, I think we just need to keep at it as journalists, potential journalists, aspiring journalists, to teach the world and to compel them to mobilize people about the risks and also the responses towards it, and work as ants. Do what the ants do. They don't move things by themselves, they move in a group. So we have to move like the ants. And I think I've been on this question. So thanks for the opportunity for being here and for just meeting everyone and everyone online. Bye.
I've lost my, okay. Let me just ask you. So you have this plan and it goes from micro to macro. What do you think some of your challenges might be to get the messages amplified that you want to be amplified?
Okay, so great. One of my challenges right now to get my message out is the frequency on the radio station. We have only 10 watts of broadcasting, which is probably from here, CARIMAC, to about Taylor Hall, Scotia. Not much frequency as it relates to the entire country hearing us. The upside to that, however, is that we have a website that you can click a link and you can listen all over the world. Another negative to us bringing the news and informing citizens and the world about disaster and response and crisis is also, I don't think we have satellite phones that we spoke about in day 1 or day 2.
Day one.
So we would need some equipment as it relates to disconnecting from social media. Social media is fine because I've developed in last year, 2023, a social media page, Jet FM 88.7 on Instagram, that will flow over into our Facebook page, which I'm to acquire by management as soon as they're back on the island. So those are, we see the challenges, but we have the solutions. It's just monetary help that we need. And also I'm in the stage of formulating a committee, because without a committee, we can't get more frequency. So we need people from where we're broadcasting now, which is Dressick, St. Mary, Gale, and Jeffertown, that can hear the station. We need people from all 3 communities to come on board so that we can have a committee, so we can take it to the relevant authorities to get more exposure, so wider Jamaica can hear us.
Thank you so
But
much.
I'm positive
plan.
that they will hear the voices from the hills of St. Mary.
Great, thank you. Who wants to go next? Anybody online would like to go next? Just raise your hand so I know to come to you. We're giving the audience online an opportunity.
I can go.
Yeah, Jewel, go ahead.
Right. So for me, in terms of what I've learned from the conference, I want to see if I can apply to join the DRR Media Hub, right? That sounds interesting and relevant. And one of the other things that I thought was really important was the one about forming relationships at all the organizations and agencies related to disaster preparedness, disaster risk reduction, like, getting to know people at the hospitals, getting to know people at ODP and here, getting to know all those people. That's a lot of work, but I think it's worth it. I think that was an excellent idea. In terms of what I think journalists can do as a group, well, just to give you an example, I think it was last year, they had this wonderful big conference here at the Hyatt about financing, climate change, technology things to reduce climate change, to reduce emissions and so on. Apparently, it's a very big, it's a multi-billion-dollar industry, the technology that's out there to cut emissions. At the same time, on that same week, we had massive rains in Trinidad. I'm not even sure how massive they were, but the point is that it took people like 4 hours to get home from where it would normally just take you half an hour. So what I would suggest is that when journalists go to these press conferences where they're going on enthusiastically about how they're going to do these things, all this and that and the other, to cut our emissions, bear in mind that the Caribbean produces less than 1% of global emissions. We need to ask them, so that's nice. We could say that's nice, but what are you doing about the actual impacts of the climate change? Like, what are you doing to cut flooding and so on? Because I think we all know that part of the problem too is also the town and country planning, not enforcing rules and stuff like that. So the questions that I think need to be asked instead of just regurgitating, oh, look, we're doing this wonderful job of cutting emissions. Each time they bring that up, I say, ask them, so about some recent disaster, some recent flooding or something that could have been avoided if more investment had been put in those things, and ask them, what are you doing about that? So those are my 2 thoughts.
Thank you, Jewel. What about in room? Emma. Hold on.
Hello, yes, sorry about that. I have my own personal blog and I write on a platform called Global Voices, which is obviously global. I've been a part of that community of journalists, activists, all kinds of people, bloggers like me, for several years now. and I started writing my blog in 2010. So that's 14 years now. And my earliest stories were about the oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico. And I was agonizing over that huge, endless, stream of oil. So I've always been interested in writing, and mostly writing about environmental issues, climate change. I started learning more about that and writing about it. And what I see coming out of this workshop is that I've already started making connections with disaster risk reduction in terms of the impact not only on the environment but on people. And I've written quite a bit about human rights issues as well. That's something I'm interested in. So I'm just seeing all the connections now even more clearly as a result of this workshop. And I thought Luis's presentation was very interesting in that there's several different layers of disaster risk reduction stories that we can explore. There's the economic aspect, the gender issues and so on. So I want to explore each of those more and go a bit more in depth. Now, as a blogger, I don't go out chasing around stories very often. I try to collect stories, so I will do that much more actively. And I mostly work online, so I'm at my computer most of the day and at home most of the day. So I want to more actively collect stories from around the island and the Caribbean that will illustrate the impact of disaster and crises, not just the impact, but try to find solutions. So that's the most important thing. Also, an aspect of my work, which I really think is important, is clarifying the language surrounding these issues. So breaking down the technical jargon and making it more accessible to a more general audience. So that's my plan.
That's a very important last point, because a lot of organizations we found, they tend to say things that are quite technical and very specific, and that's why the public probably never gets it. And it's very important for journalists to understand how to do that and to encourage those entities to break it down further. Thanks for that, Emma. Next.
I just wanted to make a comment or add something to what Kimberly would have said earlier. The thing is, a lot of people don't take disaster risk management seriously. They don't take it seriously. They don't think about the effects of an earthquake until an earthquake takes place or there's a tremor. You understand? They don't. And so I think there's a mindset that needs to be changed where people are more aware, or people take it more seriously, the impact of a hurricane, the impact of an earthquake, right? I just wanted to add that also to answer the question. I am a journalism major here at CARIMAC. As I would go into the workplace, what I believe that I could do when I get there is to, as was mentioned earlier, build more connections or build connections with people within this sphere. In addition to that, I think that not many people are understanding what is being said when it's said. And so, to be able to simplify more, I always find an issue with, even when I'm listening to the news, reading the newspaper, people just using all these jargons, as you said before, using these jargons. And I'm like, what does this mean? I don't know what this means. I don't know what this means. My grandmother, who had a primary school education, probably not gonna understand it either, even more. And so that's something as well. What we can do as a group is, I suppose we will just have to continue to speak more on the issue. yeah.
Thanks for that. Another one we have, okay, Jacob online, and then we'll come back to the room. Jacob?
Hello, hope you get me.
Jacob,
On the road.
Jacob, you're breaking
The part of it will be better. Oh, you
Hi,
okay?
Jacob.
Hello.
Your
You get me better?
your audio is breaking up a lot.
Jacob, I'll
Okay. Let
I'll-
me come back in the next 5 minutes.
yeah. Let me take
Come back in
Jacob.
because I'm on the road. Yes. Okay, let me
Okay, Jacob, we'll come back to you. Let's go to Larissa online, and then we'll come back to the room. Larissa?
come back in the next 5 minutes.
Mute. Go ahead, Larissa. You're on mute, Larissa.
Yes, sorry about that. Yes, so for me, this was really a learning in theory because I covered the volcano in St. Vincent and it was new to me on the ground. I was just feeling my way, what to do. And yes, I got some things right, but looking back and from learning from here these days, I learned that there were some errors along the way. But so one thing I'd go back and maybe work with is the organization with the television station that I am with to have a plan in place, which we don't have for the organization and the news media, SPG TV. So with that, I think we'd be better prepared and the need for training of the younger ones there in the newsroom. So I'd be able to impart because I think my editor is on here as well. So we'd work together and then to work with the organizations like the NEMO, to work closely with them and see how we can do more reports before a disaster takes place. And so I think that those are the things. And then like I think others said, to simplify what the Met Office or the jargons that are there, so we can simplify it for the people. And I know the fishermen rely on the TV station to see what's the weather like, what's before they go out to fish. So I think that's one way, and they were really asking for that collaboration maybe with the Met Office. And because I know in many instances, the fishermen, at least 3 times I did a coverage where they were lost at sea. This is because they had no early warning to say that the seas are they don't have high swells and that sort of thing. So for me, this was interesting, and I'm happy that I participate in this week, and I know what I have to do when I get back.
Thanks very much, Larissa. So networking obviously is a very important thing and continuous learning. We have one in the room here.
Yes, good morning, Ursula here. I want to start by saying thank you so much for the opportunity to be here. I mean, we could have been online, but we eat, sleep, breathe, live it when we're here in person, even talking about it at breakfast. So very grateful for the opportunity. Personally, well, of course, when I get back home, the first thing would be to get to the National Office of Disaster Services to ask what they're doing about getting tsunami ready, recertified this year. I think that's major on my agenda. I too want to access the UNDRR Media Hub to work on a risk reduction strategy for the organization as well. I think we also need a crisis management strategy. So I will try to well, perhaps not do both, not coordinate, so to speak. Personally as well, I as a journalist, I've always said the worst thing to be is an empath. Perhaps not strong language, but even when watching the trampling of the lady in the simulation yesterday, I couldn't watch that. So for me personally, I think that's something that I need to work on to be able to access those victim stories. If somebody gets murdered at home and somebody has to speak to the family, I assign somebody to that because I don't want to do that personally. So perhaps that's something that I need to work at to be able to access those stories. From a collective perspective, well, before I get to that, I host every year a program called Eye on the Storm. It starts at the beginning of the hurricane season, and I do another one at the end of the season. And usually it's with the director of the National Office of Disaster Services and with the director of meteorology. So we look at the storms, the forecasted strength of storms, what we're doing in terms of preparedness. But now after being here, I realized that needs to be extended to some of the victims from previous disasters that we've had, to get some of the stories on the ground, to make that a part of the program for not only better production, but to get a triangulated, I guess, view of what's happening on the ground and what needs to be done, perhaps. I think as a region, I think when we, for example, at the station, look for regional stories, we tend to look for those stories that are either political in nature to share with our audiences. And perhaps if we could look for more of the stories that are based on disaster readiness and risk management, that could be a good thing, getting the message out there as to what's happening in other jurisdictions. I also think that perhaps we could do a better job of sharing some of the stories or best practices that happen in other areas, other territories. For example, if Latino or Sanka write a very good piece in their territory, look at it and see how they've been able to, get victims' perspectives, look at what governments are doing, look at what the aid agencies are doing, and so that we can then incorporate them into our own media houses to be able to make our reporting better. And yes, I think that's it for me. Thanks.
Yeah, you raise an important point too, which is, looking at the best practices by others. Don't underestimate the power of regional collaboration. It's very important. It's significant for our region because we're small. Most of our news entities are small. And so when you look at what we are facing, there's so much commonality that it only makes sense to work collaboratively. And that way, the pressure is taken off of one person and you have 3, 4, or 5 working together. So that's something we should be doing. I'm going to go to Marlon online and then come back to the room and then to Jacob. Marlon?
Thank you. I am a talk show host for a program called Entrepreneurship in Focus, where we focus on young and seasoned entrepreneurs, some of the challenges they face or they were able to overcome. So the session over the last few days was very impactful to me. One of the things that really stood out, because from time to time I'm asked to cover different events and write different pieces, was the press conference that we did yesterday. I was able to put myself in the position of the moderator and to see how she was moderating the panel, as well as to look from a journalist perspective. And one of the things that caught my attention was when, for instance, in Guyana, we recently had an helicopter gone missing. And when the senior journalists were interacting with the army officials, they were observing every single thing as it relates to their choice of words, their
Marlon, you went on mute.
choice of words, or posture when delivering a press conference and all of these things, and to pick up on it so as to see if the person is really in tune with what they're saying, if the body language matches their words, and so as to really get a sense of urgency. One of the things I also noted was at the beginning of the press conference, there were some greetings and pleasantries. But I was able to learn from senior journalists here in Guyana that in the face of an emergency or crisis, you skip all the pleasantries and just get to the matter. This is what is happening. This is what we know. This is what we're working to do. And we interact with the journalists as relates to that regard. So I'm not sure if that is the right way, but I'm here to learn, and I look forward to interacting with each and every one of you. What I believe would be most effective as well is to have strong support for persons that are now entering the journalism profession. For instance, somebody like me who has no prior experience in journalism, just being in the talk show and now being thrown into this field fully, I'm like lost in this field completely. So I'm here to grab all of the information that I can and to observe, and to hopefully that I observe the right things so as they can implement and be successful in this field.
Thanks, Marlon. About the press conference, Wesley and I discussed this at breakfast too. To those of you who have mock press conference, you've been to many government press conferences. You did such an awesome job. And you know, going through the pandemic, it reminded me of some of the press conferences witnessed in Trinidad, where by the time they talk, the journalists almost have no time to do anything. And I think it's one we need to understand how we ask those questions and fit them in the changeover of speakers on a panel in a press conference. And Wesley and I were having a very lengthy discussion, and we decided, you know what, we need to do more mock press conferences with journalists in the region, because when you look at how they do it, I mean, in other parts of the world, you see that there are some questions, they make sure they get them in one way or the other, or they follow up very quickly. But yes, press conferences is something we need to be a little better at, guys, because otherwise time will be out and we wouldn't ask the questions. I'm going to come to one in the room and then I'll go to Jacob. Somebody in the room had their hand up in the back. Yeah.
Hi, good morning, everyone. I'm Teresa De Silva from the Red Cross. So I must admit, Kieran, when I first got the invitation to attend this workshop, I was like, but this is for broadcasters and journalists. Why am I coming as a comms professional and a volunteer with the Red Cross? But I can totally see, you know, the usefulness of having persons from the humanitarian organizations from, I'm not sure if anybody from ODPEM was here, would have been great to have like the comms person from ODPEM and so forth here as well. But this was really a very, very beneficial workshop, and it also speaks to the need. I was saying this to Wesley yesterday, or I think it was Paul, about the need to build a network with media and comms professionals from organizations like the Red Cross, ODPEM, etc., to maintain that constant flow of communication, because it's so essential. And for me personally, as something that I commit to doing, having been to this workshop and hearing, you know, all the lessons learned, etc., is to share more stories of the work that the Red Cross is doing, especially as it relates to disaster risk reduction, disaster risk management. Louise would have shared like some of the different issues with disaster risk reduction, and the Red Cross is actually doing a lot of work, some of which have been shared. Chris has been very useful in helping to share. Yes, Chris, Sergio, he's always willing to share some of the stories that we send to them. Last year, he shared our story on a climate smart agriculture initiative that we're doing with the Deaf Village. But we're doing so much more. Like we've worked in Old Harbour Bay, for example, under the Resilient Islands Initiative with the Nature Conservancy. And that's a project that has helped to build the resilience in the coastal community of Old Harbour Bay through implementing or helping them to come up with a suite of nature-based solutions, right? And this is just one of the many things that the Red Cross is doing, not just in Jamaica, but in other Caribbean islands as well, and certainly across the Americas. So I commit personally, even though I'm just a volunteer with the Red Cross, but just committing to trying to build that partnership and sharing more stories with the media, especially here in Jamaica, but also across the Caribbean. And for the other journalists who are coming from other Caribbean countries, I can connect you with the IFRC Comms regional manager, because of course it would be good for you to have those contacts, and I'll share your contacts with her as well, so that that connection can continue, so you're aware of what the other Red Cross national societies are doing. And one fruitful conversation that was also had with Paul from UNESCO is exploring the possibility of the Red Cross also offering some of the trainings that we mentioned, first aid and disaster risk management, to media houses. So that's one tangible thing that we're hoping to come out of this as well. So thanks again for the opportunity, and it was really a pleasure to be here.
Thank you very much for that. And MIC, you know, is another way if you want to connect with journalists. We have over 450 in our network across our region, and it may be good to send information out through our newsletters too. So we'd be happy to share that.
Yes, and also just a reminder about the pre-hurricane conference that Horace mentioned yesterday. It happens every year about April or May, and it's usually online, so it's an opportunity for journalists to connect to that and hear like so many different information that would be useful for you to share. It's not just the Red Cross. We invite different representatives from agencies including NOAA, including CPREDNAC, and so forth. So there's so many different organizations that come on board and share insightful information about being prepared for the hurricane season. So again, that's another opportunity as well that
And what are
could be
those
shared.
dates?
I think Horace had mentioned this year will be in April, but I'll get the information and share. But the website is usually prehurricaneconference.org. Prehurricaneconference.org. So I'll share the info as soon as I get it.
Okay, and we'll make sure we distribute it. Thank you. We're gonna go to Jacob online and come back to the room. Jacob.
Hello. Hope the line is better now.
Yes, it is.
Yeah, so I'll quickly want to share, first of all, some of the strategies we've been doing in St. Kitts and Nevis, which is in line with this particular concept of the workshop that is going on. And I would suggest this workshop to become an annual or even biannual concept. The aspect of communication, we decided to take it beyond journalism, but let it be holistic communication. And we've made it stood on 7 pillars. Public relations. And in the sense of public relations, we embodied the journalistic broadcasting, public speaking, etc. under that. The next pillar was database and research. The third pillar is marketing and creative. The fourth pillar is message formation. The fifth pillar is telecommunication. And the sixth pillar is policies, which will be flexible based on the timing. As the approach of paradigms change in communication, so too should the policies be adjusted. And finally, incident command. And on these responsibilities is not limited to the journalists per se. If we look at COVID, look at what happened in social media. Unfortunately, the wrong set of persons were the loudest who sent out wrong messages, and it was just flooding and flooding where you had to carefully diagnose to know what is right. So instead of using the few journalists to combat those thousands of persons, we now thought it wise to build emergency communicators using those same persons who have gained all popularity in the community to become a voice, yet from a trained perspective. And while that is going on, for instance, we started using school children. There is a talk show every last Saturday of the month with the education officer. A particular student from a school will be utilized for the hazard on the month. If it is earthquake, that student is the one giving the lecture. What is earthquake? What is it to do before, during, and after? So because that child is there, it gets the attention of the mother, the father, the auntie, the relatives, as opposed to when a journalist is just reading that and persons just see it like a normal thing, right? So attention had always worked by using those. Then for creative, we use musicians. Right now, we have jingles for earthquake, jingle for landslide, jingle for hurricane, jingles for almost all the hazards. And these songs will be played in buses, they will be played in restaurants. So that same message is still going, a part of just under the umbrella from a journalist. Because disaster management itself is 90% communication, we like it or not. We are not the one doing the search and rescue. Fire does it, we just coordinate. So in coordination, what do? We communicate. So I let it be looked upon outside that stringent approach of news writing and journalistic forwards, traditional view. Let it go to communication. The average man is on the phone every day reading, but is it disaster messages they are reading? So how do we make that day-to-day life connect to what we want them to get, other than them getting it only when an article is put out there? To be truthful, the young persons will not have time to even be reading our articles. But if it comes in another milieu that connects to their world, they read, and the way we do it, we get them to become that voice. We get them to become that advocate, to give out the message we would have wanted to give to them. Yes, so why I'm bringing all the, and for sure, we've seen the result. It is really gaining weight. We divided from January to December. Each of the months, we put a particular hazard because we want to come up from that hurricane centric. Each time you think of disaster management, all you think of is hurricane season, then maybe earthquake or landslide. What of drought? What of volcano? What of tsunami? What of fire? There are different hazards that all should have the same weight of preparedness. So now all I'm contributing on is for us, first of all, to be mindful of the message, the real audience, especially the vulnerable persons, children, disabled, and see how they can effectively be a part of it from a participatory standpoint. I believe it will make these things so real. If not, much of what we are doing will be surfaced on either the internet or in institutions, yet you go to the ghetto cities, they don't even know what you are talking about unless something bad happens. So that's my contribution.
Thank you, Jacob. You sound like a DRR warrior. I think we have to
I
give you.
am so radical. And one thing I should let you know is that my cousin was buried alive by landslide. So that was a passion that moved me to say, let no other person die like my cousin. So I take the communication thing so practical to see that it saves even the most stubborn person. And how effective can it reach that? That is why you get such a passion.
Thank you so much, Jacob. Thank you for that. Jacob raised a very important point, the idea of influencers or credible messengers. A credible messenger is a type of influencer. Influencers tend to have much larger audiences, but even in our own media houses, we would have TV hosts or radio show hosts or columnists who are very popular, who follow that line or would be categorized as credible messengers. And probably we need to start looking there as well and extend out into the community. Thank you again, Jacob. We'll take one from the room and then go back to online.
Good morning, Keola Green, third year journalism major at CARIMAC. First, I'd like to say thanks to the Media Institute of the Caribbean for providing us, myself and my other classmates with the opportunity to sit in and experience and learn more as it relates to crisis preparedness and response. It really emphasizes the need for continuous training for journalists in all sectors and all ages. And I appreciate the fact that MIC has been finding ways to cooperate CARIMAC students, so we appreciate that. Something I would have liked to hear more about, or probably I missed it, would have been uniformed reporting in the region as it relates to crisis. When I say this, I mean in terms of, let's say there's a situation happening in St. Vincent, it would have been nice to have a network or an instant communication where those in St. Vincent would be able to give us that information, so everyone is reporting on the same thing and carrying the same facts and using the same language. For example, during COVID, you know, while everyone was doing the reporting, you had some people saying Omicron or some people saying Omicron. So just simple things like that, I would like to hear being discussed.
That's a very valid point. Thank you for that. I'm going to put that on our list of things to address with our other colleagues. Let's go to Roseanne online.
Pleasant good evening again and morning. Sorry, I'm from Jamaica. I'm Roseanne Smith. I, like the Red Cross volunteer, I too said, why am I going into this meeting, this workshop, when I first saw it pop up on my social media? But as a lecturer in disaster management, I am very much interested in the communication aspect as mentioned by Jacob. And having followed some of these news journalism and, you know, sharing on different hazards, I always say, you know, what other opportunities, what are the journalists interested in when it comes to disasters, and what do we have to share? And one of the things that I can say from a researcher standpoint is that we tend to do a lot of research, and you will hear the complaint that we do it in this technical, more academia type of language, and because we are publishing, but then the results are very important for the community. And I realize that there is a major gap there. And if we can work or collaborate with journalists to share and get that information out that can benefit the communities, that will be good. And it was really good being here, because from my own experience, I realized that there is a gap when it comes to school and disaster curriculum material and so on. And so I would have written a children's book on hurricane. But guess what? I promoted it with TVJ, Smile Jamaica. And then I didn't know who are the journalists, who are the me, how can I, cross the Caribbean? So it is narrowly here in Jamaica. I was able to do with Smile, the early morning Smile Jamaica. In St. Vincent, there was some challenges there. I was asked questions like, when I reached out, there was an agreement with the media house, and then they would say, well, did she contact Nemo first? And I'm saying, no, I did not. And apparently I had to go through Nemo before I can get the media house to share on what I'm doing. So there, that knowledge of the procedures and who we need to reach out to is a issue. I've recently written on the volcanic, the entire experience in story form, and also on the earthquake that happened in Jamaica, that have everybody wondering, are we ready? That brings out the reality of the possibility, because it's always when we are impacted that we realize that, things need to be done. And so my mind now is in animation and, screenwriting, but I don't really have that background. So I'm glad to be in a room with CARIMAC and the other media houses. And if at the end we can be presented with that database of media houses and their contacts and so on, that will be very good, so that when we talk about bridging the gap, it will be us reaching out to them and they also reaching out to us for greater collaboration.
Thanks for that, Roseanne. Now I'm curious to see the book, so I'll be calling you very soon. Let's go to Sam online.
Hi, good morning, all. Can you hear me?
Yes, we're hearing you.
I was listening to everything, and again, I'm based in the USVI, which we're kind of in a very different position than most of my other colleagues here, because while we are Caribbean, we are also an unincorporated territory of the United States, which means that we kind of function like the bastard child on the outside, where you may get a lollipop every now and again, but you cannot acknowledge your daddy is your daddy in public. So that being said, we fall under US jurisdiction for a lot of things. We can't control our ports. So even in things like sending aid or aid coming in, when St. Thomas was raised by Irma in 2017, it raised St. Thomas St. John first. That's when the BVI got hit as well. People from St. Croix sent supplies over, fishermen just doing it, but there was also problems with the ports because they weren't open. So we, even as journalists, couldn't come over. And then when St. Croix got raised, we were caught in Maria as a Cat 5, actually trapped between the two eye walls as one was breaking down and the other was forming. That's what raised St. Croix. And then when it hit Puerto Rico, we ceased to exist. So there was not even media coverage, to the point that I think sometime last year, they had an ABC news story about the follow-up on Maria, and they went to St. Thomas, never stepped foot on St. Croix when St. Croix was the one impacted by Maria. So St. Croix just never existed as far as even media coverage from that was concerned. And we were the only jurisdiction that got hit by Maria as a Cat 5. Dominica had it as a Cat 4. We got Cat 5, Puerto Rico got Cat 4. I think there's a disconnect in the region a lot of times because of the territories, like the French territories or the US or the Netherlands territories, where oftentimes our stories are lost because we are kind of isolated from your CARICOMs or your OECSs, or just because of the bureaucracy of it all. And I think that we as just colleagues within media, within the same jurisdiction, because at the end of the day, we're within the same region, I think we kind of need to be more mindful of those things where we don't let stories drop because they don't fall underneath a certain island group umbrella, because oftentimes we're the only voice that each other has. So I think that's something that we kind of need to be more cognizant about. And then also consider when you're talking about even messaging for what's important or how to talk about disasters, oftentimes the whole political thing comes into play. Recently, we've been dealing with an administration that is not too fond of media being very direct about what the case of the territory actually is, to the point that they've been threatening stations with pulling of governmental ads, which, you know, amount for large amounts of revenues, to keep journalists or media personnel with their mouth shut. So if you're not singing the praises of the administration, your station is then threatened with sanction, for lack of a better term. So it's a thing of how do we as journalists navigate this? In my instance, I'm pretty much the only person on the news team at this point. Everybody else is gone. When Maria hit, everybody vacated the premises, and I went from being just regional news to everything. So how do we then do that when you are the only journalist, or there's not very many actual journalists where talk radio is boss and people say what they say unsubstantiated, but you have to come with facts? How do we balance that? Or is there some way we can arm journalists in those situations? Because I'm sure I'm not the only one at some point that's been in that position.
Yeah, thanks for that, Sam. It is a real situation for many. So one, I applaud you because I know you are always online with MIC in our sessions. And I think, you know, you have a support team with MIC and your colleagues who are on. So that's one. So getting your messages out or getting assistance and support for any of you who are here with us, know that that is one of the reasons why MIC is here. You also have the Association of Caribbean Media Workers. Countries that do not have media associations, they do have focal points in a lot of countries. And I would encourage you to go to the ACM website and look at that. Media viability is a true challenge for us all, especially smaller newsrooms and news entities that are not state-owned. And it is something that we will continue to grapple with, I think, for the next 3 or 4 years. But, you know, this comes to a point that is, I wanted to address this question that Andrea had put in the chat. If somebody could scroll, the question was about the disadvantages, I think, of newspapers in times of natural disaster or natural hazards. So the thing is, newspapers should be preparing, like all of the media entities, whether you are radio, television, print, digital, whether you're operating on the social media page, you should be preparing the public all the time for eventuality. That should never stop. The thing about newspapers is that it doesn't have the immediacy, which is probably why radio is the most popular form of media in our region. It's because of the immediacy of it. And it is also because our radio stations are reflections of our culture in our oral tradition. So, you know, everybody has a favorite radio station. In Trinidad, we have 35 in a population of 1.4 million, and that is crazy. But each radio station sound is very different. And so, you know, you may not find that with newspapers. However, listening to Chandra Clark yesterday, I hope you all realize that we have to embrace the digital. And so now for newspapers who have their mobile media, whether it's their e-newspaper or whether it's an app or whether it's through their digital platforms of X or Facebook or Instagram or TikTok. I mean, I have views on TikTok being used for news, but you know, the way of the youth is the other way. So I have to give in sometimes. But the thing is, so newspapers need to embrace the alternative distribution platforms. There is a saying, and I will repeat it here because this is my belief. There's this saying that content is king. And my response to this, and if you all use it, you have to make sure you give me credit, is distribution is queen. So you have to look at how you are distributing your content now. And so for newspapers, I really don't think there's a disadvantage. It's whether or not you're tapping into the opportunities. And that is how you have to make a difference. And as a media owner, I have to tell you, the opportunities are endless, but you have to look at your resources. And that is not just human resources, but financial resources as well. and you have to figure out what is the best way forward. For those of us who are independent media owners, it may be that you have affiliations to other forms of media. For those of us who are freelance journalists or bloggers, it may be that we start to set up, or you start to set up links and affiliations to other entities who have these shared interests as you do. Huffington Post, remember when they started, never paid anybody who was writing for the Huffington Post. It was all free content because Ariana had a great network, and she knew a lot of very bright people, and decided I wanted to start this. And you can see where it went. So there are many lessons when we look at these situations. So thank you all. I think we have a long list of things we want to do. If you all want to continue being in touch, I will be sharing each other's email addresses so that everybody here could stay in touch with each other. And we are hoping that we can do more in this space, but we would not be here today without the support of a few people. So let me ask Mr. Paul Hector of UNESCO to give some closing remarks, and then I will do the vote of thanks. Paul?
Thank you very much, Kiran. And truly, it's really been an immense pleasure, these 2.5 past days. Just as a bit of context, UNESCO, we've developed something called Media in Crisis Preparedness and Responses. And this project is being implemented within the framework of that project. Our preparation started back in, at least for this event, started back in November, December, working on really trying to flesh out the various aspects that we wanted to emphasize in this project. And I must say, huge thanks to MIC and also CBU, who have been accompanying us in this process. And also, of course, UNDRR and their project Media Saving Lives. Kiran will, of course, thank everyone who has been here, but I just want to add also, how grateful and appreciative we are to the various experts who have been here, and also, of course, to you, our audience, those both here in the room and those also online. Really, your engagement has really made all these efforts worth it. Going forward, the whole idea behind this event, of course, is to move from concept to practice. And so this is really just the first step. Of course, there's already work in the region which exists. And what we really will be doing along with MIC, CBU, UNDRR, potentially the Red Cross and also others, and of course you, is again moving forward. And I just want to highlight some of the key areas in which we will be moving forward. So first of all, supporting organizations. I think everyone has really recognized the importance of things such as doing internal risk assessments for our operation before, during, and after events. We've also, I think, all very much appreciated the importance of the disaster preparedness plans, the crisis reporting plans, and so forth. And really, we'll be looking at ways to really help you in terms of mobilizing the necessary resources and also the helping hands. Because as we've heard time and time again, one of the challenges we face is often small size. So people are doing many things, and as important as these issues are, sometimes we just don't have the resources within in-house to really tackle this. So that's one of the areas we will be supporting you. Of course, building networks, we've seen this is really, really key. It's as Wesley said, there are many stories within the stories, and within this whole issue of disaster preparedness response, there's so many actors. And so building networks this is really, really key. And as we said today and also on the other days, both before, well before, to ensure that we have that sort of trust, that understanding, that awareness during, and of course after. We'll be supporting also things like mentoring and coaching opportunities. And as we've heard, there are opportunities out there, grants, fellowships, etc., providing the information on how we can really access those. One of the things which I think is really important, and we see the value of the conversations, the exchange, there's a lot of knowledge that needs to be shared. And platforms, things, for example, like talks, webinars, this is, of course, really, really crucial. And, you know, here we are in CARIMAC. It's a teaching and learning facility. I think it's really important that, given the position of the Caribbean, our vulnerability to climate change, etc., that we also look at the development of courses so that we can have, whether it's in the case of electives, we can have these resources so that students who are attending institutions like this, as part of their preparation for careers as journalists, can be exposed to this type of material. And of course, also for those who are already journalists in service, again, make courses, whatever form, appropriate, available. So these are just a few of the things that we will be doing going forwards. And, really, I count on your support. I count on, our collaboration. I count on us building bridges to really, move forward on this really, really important issue. As we've heard, the investment that we make in preparedness, the investments that we make in knowledge, this is something which will really have multiplier effects. It will bring dividends, not just for us, not just for our families and our organizations, but really for our region. So thank you all for your commitment, support, and look forward to continuing this journey together. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Paul, and thank you for your continued confidence in Media Institute. I have to thank a few people. I would like to thank Sonia Gill, Secretary General of CBU, who was part of this process with us. I want to also thank Luis and UNDRR for being here, flying from Panama. And thank you so much for your support as well. I have to also thank CARIMAC and Corinne in particular. Please give Corinne a round of applause. Corinne has really been our anchor here at CARIMAC to ensure this happens, to our technical team and the students who took on technical responsibilities. Round of applause for them. It's Saturday morning. They're here. And to all of you, our participants, I want to thank you, and to all of our presenters. This would not have been as fun and enlightening and as engaging as it was. And I hope that we can continue this conversation. A couple of quick things. Remember that the CBU Media Awards is coming up. Some of you have written great pieces, and I hope that you all will enter. That closes off on the 28th. So please ensure that you participate. If you have not joined the MIC newsletter, I encourage you to do that via the website and also CIJN.org, because some of the grant opportunities and other opportunities will be posted there. You can also follow our socials. Don't forget our hashtag MIC Investigates. And so we've come to the end. So this will not be goodbye. It's goodbye for now only. But we know that we'll be seeing everyone soon again. So to all of you folks online, have a great weekend. Stay safe, keep communicating, and keep doing the great job you are. Thank you. And to those of you in the room, lunch is on its way. And we look forward to having a meal together as we close off our workshop. Thank you, guys. Take care. Bye.
Girl, and I tried. Okay. I'm not sure what happened there just now. Something we're recording came up. Just 1 second. One of the things that when I was developing the slide, I was thinking curious to make sure that my thoughts were clear and to make the point that there is truth in humanitarian reporting, that the facts are the facts. Oftentimes, when you are reporting on what's happening at a humanitarian level, and for me, that is authentic journalism that saves lives. Oftentimes, I read a lot of reports and a lot of entities who are offering fellowships, and these fellowships are taken up by journalists in Africa and the Pacific, and you see a lot of the stories that are very heart-wrenching that people want to read, and I'm not saying that we're not seeing a lot of that in the Caribbean. And the other point is that I think, and I know that given the challenge with the small newsrooms and persons working to deadlines, it is difficult for us to have what we call developmental journalism in the Caribbean. A little bit, I mean, you see some of it, but a lot of it too is also coming from persons who are not what we call bona fide journalists or reporters. A lot of it is coming from persons who have an interest in the subject, or persons who they don't have all the facts, but write stuff around their thought. And think about it, those persons oftentimes have a lot of followers on social media. One of the things too that came out the last session where somebody said to me that journalists don't have time to do research, but research is critical. If you are a journalist who's worth your salt, despite the challenges of you're doing a story, you have to do research. It's not that somebody's just going to hand it to you. So that's one of the things I want to say, that research is necessary, especially when you are going to be in a subject area such as disaster management. I am challenged sometimes for the two regional press conferences that we've had since I've been with SEDIMA. We have about 26 or 27 news reporters on that call. And you get the same two questions coming from the journalists all the time. Two basic questions. Are all the countries ready for June 1st for the hurricane season? And are there any countries that you would say that need to do something to make sure that the country is ready? Outside of that, no other questions. And we spend an hour asking any questions, but those are two questions that come, nothing more. And I'm just saying that, there needs to be a little more research done so that, reporters come on the line or they come to ask questions, having some knowledge of the subject that they're following. And to make the point that we also have to be able to build relationships between organizations in the Caribbean, like SEDIMA, UNDRR, to build those relationships outside of crisis time, so that when a crisis does occur, that we know that, okay, this is some person who's been following, and they're not just looking for a soundbite, but they're looking to educate as well. And that is not to say that I don't appreciate that. Obviously, we have news cycles to fill. I totally appreciate that. But I just, sometimes a lot of the reporters are not seized of information to ask questions, to get the good answers, the answers that give you what you may call a very good story that is beyond just a soundbite for that news clip. And I think I wanted to end with this one, which is that we need more humanitarian journalism, which cares less about how newsworthy a crisis is and more about the scale of suffering. That it's about the people. At the end of the day, we both do our jobs to educate and to make life better for the public that we serve across the region. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. I hold up my slide there.
Thanks a lot for that, Keith. Now, are there any questions and comments before we move on to Luis? Keith is going to be here with us for another half an hour. So we can, if you remember something, raise the issue online if you're monitoring online, or simply raise your hand in the room here.
15 minutes, Leslie, 15 minutes.
15 minutes. Okay.
Yeah, they have to. Yeah.
Okay. Good. So, Uncle Price.
I take what Keith said about the small newsrooms and no time to develop beats, and as well as not making the level of contact with the agencies. Only people who have a real interest in this type of environmental type of reporting and whatnot tend to do that. And Keith would know, I guess 2 decades ago, we had like Terry Ali, military, who would have been interested in these sort of things, and a few others since then. But really and truly, you don't get that. What he also says is true about when you go to these regional things. I sit and I listen. I can't believe people are just asking the same questions all the time without going into any depth. But having agreed with you there, I would also say, Keith, that one of the things that I think the agencies need to do, and certainly this came to me by coming here, is that they also need to reach out to the media houses. Not wait to June, but like no, we're reaching out to the media houses. We're trying to put on things like having talks like this with the newsrooms, some of the newsrooms around the islands as well. I think that would be extremely helpful, so that people know what you're doing and what you're capable of offering them, because people are more involved on a daily basis with covering the politics and the economics and whatnot within the country. They only look at any impending danger when it's imminent. So I think that's something that you can look at as well. Your reaction.
If I could respond, and I agree with you, and what I will say is, since I've been here, I've created a WhatsApp group we did some training back in 2022. Yes, I think Sean Farrell from CBC was there, if I remember. And what we did was we did the same training that you spoke about, and we created a WhatsApp group of those journalists from across the region who attended. There were about 28 persons. And what I've been trying to do since then is to fill that WhatsApp group with journalists who have an interest, or I can share the information. Only yesterday morning, I was speaking to one of my seniors, and we did agree that what we need to also create later in the year, if funding is allowed, to have what we call a morning or a breakfast morning conversation with editors and managers like yourself, so that we give you the context of what we are doing and what is happening in the region. Because oftentimes what you see is that you see a reporter who is sent on training, but that reporter, when he comes back, is not doing any necessarily. But by the time you get on the plane and you come back, that may not be in your head. And you can see that especially when people ask questions, as I said earlier during the press conferences. But I agree with you that we need to also reach out. I've been beginning to do that in the Caribbean. But again, you know that disaster management is not a sexy subject until it gets to the impact. And that's, we have to begin to change those mindsets, that there are stories about people, how people are living, what is happening, landslides, flooding, not just hurricanes, because that's another point. The Caribbean is not just hurricanes. We have a multi-hazard environment in which we live, and I can think of a dozen hazards that we have in the Caribbean. And therefore, we need to be able to train our minds that it's not just June to November. It is January to February, January to December that we can have any kind of those hazards. But I agree with you. We will reach out a little more.
Emma?
You getting some feedback there?
Okay.
Okay, I can hear someone.
Yeah, okay, I'm on now.
Okay.
Good. Emma, then Jewel, then Roseanne.
Unmuted. You are muted.
I can hear you.
Okay, sorry, I'm confused. My name's Emma Lewis, and I'm one of those people who likes to be on social media, as you mentioned. I agree with all that you both said just now, but I think it's very important for SEDIMA and other agencies to focus on preparedness and to realize that with climate change and so on, there isn't a a set time when we should suddenly be focusing on crises and disasters, that it can be anytime, anywhere. And we have one ongoing in Tobago at the moment. But I think it's important all year round for you to, as was said, reach out and try to maintain that relationship year round, so that when journalists have questions and so on, they know who to go to. They have a bit of background information already, like research that you would have provided with them over the time. And rather than just say, well, journalists should go and do their research, I think if you provide a solid background for them, so that when they come to a press conference and so on, they would know, they would have something to work on and could ask more detailed and meaningful questions. So I think it should be a year-round relationship and not just hurricane season, because even that season seems to have extended, or it's not all set in stone these days, and we need to expect the unexpected.
So Keith, a response to that, and then Jewel and Roseanne.
I'll just be brief. We are in conversation with the CBU at the moment to create what we call a reporters roster. Can you hear me? Are you hearing me or you're not hearing me?
Okay, better.
Okay, I'm in discussion with the CBU to create what we call a reporters roster, so that when we have various tours of duty, when there's any impact or impending threat, that we have a roster of journalists from across the region that we can choose from to take in our tour of duties. I think in the case of CBC, I'm aware that I think Crystal Hoyt went to Haiti sometime, I think a couple of years ago, maybe 2 years ago, I think, Sanka. So to do more of that. But in order to do that, we also explained that we need to train journalists and reporters who have an interest, because there's no sense in just sending anybody, but people have to have an interest in the area. And one of the plans of my programmatic year, which comes in September, is to create more training opportunities for journalists. We're also in discussion with an agency called Internews, who provides training for journalists in the area, particularly in Barbados and Dominica, and they're trying to widen that. And I'm amazed that they have a whole set of fellowships that look at both health and climate change. And they've reported to me that no journalists in the Caribbean have been taking up these fellowships. And these fellowships are like $5,000 US. Part of the excuse, or part of the explanation being given is that people don't have time. Because again, of the same issues that we raised of smaller newsrooms, people want their rest. Those are some of the issues that were raised. But I'm saying, and to answer your point about the information is there. Like, you can go on our website and see all the information. When I was in my journalistic time in Sanka, could say part of your job is to do the research, so that you can ask the questions that we may not necessarily be seeing from the point of the disaster agency. But you have to ask this question to probe. Probing is so important, and then at all this time, there's no stupid question. There's an answer, but we just have to probe. But I again, I'm taking the suggestions on board. But I would like for your media houses, if it can be shared with the list, for your journalists and your reporters to be part of that roster that we want to be able to fill out, so that we can have people who can go on tours of duties and see what is really happening across the region.
That Keith, Jewel, then Roseanne, and very quick, because we have to release Keith. Jewel,
So thank you. Actually, I have done a fellowship with Internews that was back in 2018, and I produced stories with them. But moving on from that, I am a freelancer, so I'm not attached to any particular media house, and most of the media I work with are overseas. So I would still love to be included in the roster. That's my second point. The third point I wanted to raise, there are a number of stories that I have been yearning, hankering to do. I did approach the UNDP about one of them, and they said it had to be something like self-sustaining, like a community type ongoing project and so on. But that obviously wasn't what I'm looking to do. But I do think it is a very important one related to safety and so on, and there are others that I'm interested in. So I was just wondering if, and I guess I know that the UNDRR is in the room. So I was just wondering if there is like any provision for like helping with like funding the research for those stories. So of course, you still have to get a media house to publish it. But the point is, like maybe just helping with funding the background research, because the one particular one that I approached UNDP about, that one could not just do that over the phone or something like that. I need to pick myself up and go and so on, and that one would take money. But I'm just asking. It's just a thought that I'm throwing out.
What I'll do, Joel, is you can take my email and we can have that conversation offline so that I can point you in the right direction.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
No problem.
Okay, Roseanne.
Yes, thank you. Pleasant. Good morning, all. I really like the last point about research, and I really want to stress that while I hear about going to CDIMA and other places, and I know sometimes it's very busy there in CDIMA, we also, as somebody who lectures at the University of the West Indies, I think it's good also for journalists to consider bridging that gap between academia and themselves and formulating relationships with scientists and researchers. There are the climate studies group right at University of West Indies and so on. And if you're going to be focusing, and in my experience, I realize sometimes we are called upon following the impact, maybe an earthquake and following the impact. But prior to that, or even after, there is no real engagement with researchers. So for example, we had the St. Vincent eruption, we have the Dominica earthquake, and I've been to Dominica where the post-traumatic stress and what has been happening in terms of assistance, there is a major gap there when it comes to the psychosocial, which I mentioned earlier. And right in St. Vincent, similarly, following the earthquake, there was no follow-up, and there were these indirect deaths that people assume had to do with the impact in BVI similarly. So there are stories out there that I think is of interest to the people. And if journalists are, communicating with persons in academia, it's quite possible that there are some information and, some interest in terms of questions that they can ask, or we can direct them to ask to CDIMA and other units should, something happen.
Thanks for that, Roseanne.
I totally agree with you that there are a lot of stories out there, and we do have a relationship with it. So again, journalists show the direction once.
Any parting words?
You're talking to me, Wesley? You were dropping out there just now.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, no, you said you had to leave. So I
Yes,
just want
I have to leave. Thank you so much, everybody, for engaging the questions. I do give you my word that I will follow up on those points that were made by both Sanka and my friend here, who is the online social. But I would like to also meet you, though, whilst you're doing some social media work. I think there are some opportunities there for you, so we can speak through Wesley. I just want us to bear the point that I just made. Organizations like CDIMA see the media as stakeholders, and I made that point very clear. We are very keen on having that relationship with the media. But what we require is, again, that long-term relationship. And I hope that you can take that to the reporters. They can reach out to us anytime. And if you don't have the answers, we'll point you in the direction so you can get the stories. So thank you, everybody. Thanks, everyone, and enjoy Jamaica. I'm sorry that I'm not there, but I'll enjoy the little sunny sea coming through the window there above everybody's head. Thank you very much, Wesley.
Okay, so my name is Luis. I represent the United Nations Office for Disaster Risk Reduction. In a few words, what we do is we work with our stakeholders, mainly governments, private sector, and civil society to align and develop plans and strategies for preparedness and to minimize the impact of disasters on society. Everything we do is mainly run by four pillars. No? Now? Yeah? Okay. And it has four pillars. Four priorities. The priority one is understand disaster risk that this can be considered as one of the activities under priority one, that is so all of our stakeholders have a better comprehensive of what is disaster risk, how to avoid it, how to minimize it. The priority two is strengthening disaster risk governance to manage disaster risk. We're gonna talk about governance in a little bit forward, but governance is mainly creating a network with decision-making stakeholders, such as governments, private sectors, and communities, so they can all be represented on the strategies and plan created to have more resilient societies. Then the priority two is investing in disaster risk reduction, which is a top pillar, because these plans, these strategies needs financing to be implemented, to be deployed in our countries. And the priority four is enhancing disaster preparedness for effective response and to build back better in recovery, rehabilitation, and reconstruction. We, from November 2022, we have launched the Early Warning for All initiative, but we're going to talk about that later. And that summarize preparedness and effective response. The Sendai framework has also 7 targets that they have to be achieved by 2030. Last year we had a midterm report, a midterm review of how we are progressing towards these targets. We have come a long way from 2015, but there is a long way ahead still to achieve these targets. They can be summarized in 2 pillars: substantially reduce global disaster mortality, number of affected people, economic loss in relation to GDP, and damage to critical infrastructure and service disruption. We have seen a lot of progress in the first 2, but the Americas and the Caribbean have 53% of economic losses from all the world in disaster. So this region is one of the most affected economically, and that is one of the targets that we need to achieve: reduce economic losses. And increase, on the other hand, is increase countries with national and local DRR strategies, international cooperation, and availability and access to early warning systems and DRR information. So as we said on the first day, disasters are not natural. I'm gonna go further into this. Natural triggers the idea that no matter the decision taken by humans, the event would occur anyway, and there is little we as humans can do to alter it due to its natural origins. It also blame for disaster losses to nature or to an act of God absolves powerful decision makers of responsibility for allowing or forcing people to live in vulnerable conditions. This use of language strips disaster stories of their social, political, environmental, and economic context. And there is no evidence currently to suggest a reader's understanding or interest in a story is undermined by simply using the term disaster without the adjective of natural. So as we said on the first day, hazards are natural, hazards occur naturally. The impact that that hazard has on our society is what creates or not a disaster. So we need to be prepared. We need to implement strategies and plan coordination so those hazards do not become necessarily a disaster. This is the definition I shared with you the first day, that disaster is a serious disruption of the functioning of a community or a society at any scale due to hazardous events that interact with the conditions of exposure, vulnerability, and capacity, leading to one or more of the following: human, material, economic, and environmental losses and impacts. Just to reaffirm, because this is our main concept, that if we as a society coordinate and make plans and implement strategies, we can effectively reduce the impact disaster has on our countries and our society. Disaster result when a natural or man-made hazard affects a human settlement which is not appropriately resourced or organized to withstand the impact and whose population is vulnerable because of poverty, exclusion, or socially disadvantaged in some way. Understanding and reducing risk reminds that there is no such thing as a natural disaster. There are hazards such as earthquakes, floods, droughts, and cyclones, and some cannot be prevented, but we can curb their destructive power through reducing people's exposure and vulnerability to harm. So what is governance? Governance is a form of management based on the coordinated engagement of networks of different actors to achieve collectively defined objectives. Governance, simply put, is the coordination between all of our stakeholders to coordinate plans that benefit all of our people. National DRR strategies and local DRR strategies must be created with the support of equally the government and the private sector and communities, which are the most impacted by any disaster. Nothing undermines development more than a disaster. So disaster preparedness and disaster risk reduction is about development. We go a lot of years back every time we have a disaster and we don't have any strategies to minimize their impact. So it's urgent that we create those plans and strategies. So why cover disasters from a risk reduction perspective? And this is, I'm going a little bit further from the crisis journalism, because DRR is all about the before the disaster hits. Once it hits, you must have plans to avoid losses, to avoid deaths, and we believe that if you prepare enough for that disaster, you can avoid those losses, minimize those losses. Disaster risk reduction is a political issue. As I said before, it needs a collective effort, not only from actors on governance, but we also need support from every actor in our society. Natural hazards are on the rise and will continue to make the news. On the verge of climate change, natural hazards will get worse, will be more frequent. So it's imperative that all societies have those plans in order to avoid a worse impact of climate change in our planet. It's an economic issue. As I said before, this region is the economically most affected in the world, and it's all about economics if for each dollar invested in preparedness, you can save up to $7 in rebuilding, in reconstruction. So it's a great business at the end of the day, where you are saving money that you can invest in other things. It's a human rights issue, and it's an environmental issue. It's a cultural issue, and it's a gender and inclusion issue. Disaster plans have to be created and drafted thinking about all members of our society. There is a lot of statistics that show that women are more impacted by disasters. So it's a gender issue because women are most vulnerable in the face of disaster, and plans need to take this into account. We also need to take into account our most vulnerable part of society, such as indigenous people and people living in poverty. It's not just a disaster news item. It's not only about the crisis, it's all about the preparedness and how our politicals and our leaders act in before a disaster hits. It's a health and education issue. There are, in Sendai framework is highlighted that hospitals and schools are a critical infrastructure that must be built by certain codes that assure that in the face of a disaster they can still service, they still stand and can be used in the face of a disaster. And it provides in-depth investigative articles. Early Warnings for All is our main initiative. It was launched on November 2022 by the Secretary General, and UNDRR is in charge of Pillar 1, which is understanding risk knowledge. Early warning systems are very important. I think it was Horace who talked about this initiative yesterday and highlighted how important it is to reduce losses. 24 hours of early warning can cut 30% of damages. And if we invest $800 million annually, we avoid losses of up to $16 billion. So early warnings not only save lives, but they are very important for our economics. The initiative seeks to protect all people on the planet within the next 4 years. So that's one of our main initiatives right now. And we have a DRR media network in the Americas, in the Caribbean. We have created for the past 2 years. And the idea is, since media is one of our stakeholders and it's a channel which we need so people understand risk and understand disaster risk, we created this network. We give training and specialization, access to experts, UNDRR for investigations. As I said before, communication saves lives, which is why we are creating this media network to have interested media covering DRR nearby, and so we can have more depth in news. This is the QR for join the network. I can give you the link if you want it. And that's it. Thank you.
Before you go. Not too great. I'm going to myself.
Thank you very much, Luis. Stay there because I think we have some questions and comments. Let's see who we have online. Okay, Linda, sorry, we didn't see that message about the volume. I hope people captured most of it. I think that there's a sort of, there's a topic or an issue that has been floating through this morning's presentations, and it has to do with the practice of journalism. And Luis, I mean, you would appreciate this. Journalists are primarily concerned with storytelling. And storytelling, by the good storytelling, always focus on human beings, on people. And maybe there might be sometimes an imbalance between the empathy of storytelling about humans and the science and the administration of responses and preparation and so on. And I see that kind of tension. It certainly emerged during Keith's presentation and somewhat during yours, which is that there appears to be this tension or this gap or this vacuum that exists between administration and management of such matters, the science behind it, and the Keith's research question related to that. And I don't entirely agree that most journalism in the Caribbean is research-less on questions such as these. For example, in Trinidad and Tobago alone, the 3 major television stations, the people who do environmental news are all qualified meteorologists in their own right. So when they speak about weather, when they speak about climate, they very much know what they're talking about. And some of them are even currently addressing the oil spill issue, given their knowledge of ocean currents and flows and that kind of stuff. So I don't have entirely. And then the third pillar, which has to do with storytelling, the fact that journalists need to now mass all of this material that they're receiving from the different sources, from the scientists, from the administrative / governance structures that are in place, which I believe sometimes if there's an omission of any kind, it is that we do not pay too much attention to scrutinizing critically the actions of those people with responsibility for administrating the response and so on. So that's why I said yesterday that the journalism doesn't end at the point of reporting on what has happened and the response, but the journalism ought to continue on to critically examine the institutions that are there. So because in my view, it's not always, it is true that there is not often this outreach from the media to the agent, but the agencies themselves, their outreach to media tend to be seasonal as well. So you don't particularly hear from these agencies at non-crisis or non-response times. But we have a comment here. Okay.
Good morning, everyone. Kimberly Henry here. Just on the point, Wesley, about not all journalists are researchalists, I have a personal experience with that. The other day, just a few weeks ago in January, the Harborview Citizens Association in Harborview, St. Andrew, brought my attention to a man-made gully behind some elders' home. And when it rains, it pours, as we say. So this gully was made because they were trying to take the water that was coming from the hills to put it behind the houses and not in front and lead it into the sea. Now the gully was made halfway. So the gabion wall that sustains the walls on both sides of the building, like how we're looking in CARIMAC, was absent. What that does, the water find its route into people's backyard, tearing down the buildings. Now, this story has been brought probably once or twice, but not from the angle which I took it. And I'm not going to take pride in myself to say I could be the one who researched that. Had it not been for my background in disaster risk in St. Mary while I was a student at St. Mary High and working at Jet FM in my community, I wouldn't understand that this gully was man-made and it became a political issue, as you said. Disasters are sometimes political, because I found out that where the Gabion walls stop, one party is responsible for that side and the other party is responsible for the other side. Now, when I reached out to ODPEM, NEPA, these are our agencies that are responsible in Jamaica for somewhat disasters and stuff like that. They told me the matter was at a higher level. Now, what higher level can it get when elders had to hold my hand and break down in tears, telling me they might just wake up one morning dead? Right? So when I looked and investigated and looked at the matter, I realized all they had to do when they dug up the place was to build 2 Gabion walls and let the water channel right back to the sea. None of that was done. I reported I was standing in somebody's one room to the back. A tenant moved out of one of the houses because it's now split, like an earthquake passed through it. There's no earthquake. The house is receding and falling into the gully. There's this man now below who's using tires, buying tires together to channel the water off his house. People are moving out of the area. I mean, an 80-plus-year-old could look at me and say, I don't have the money. It's only a mango tree that's holding our backyard together, the roots of a mango tree that's holding our backyard together now. So I can't say that there is not enough research being done. I think it goes back to passion, because a lot of newsrooms and news houses need to know the passion of their reporters, and the reporters themselves need to know what their passion is or are. Because if I had not had any passion for disaster risk management and elderly and humanitarian, I wouldn't have gone down there to investigate this issue that the elders brought to my attention, right? So other reporters would have gone and did the who, the what, the where, the how, the when, and left it there. I called the politician. I called ODPEM. I called NEPA. I read I read the reports that they even wrote back to the World Bank, because the World Bank was the one who funded the project. I went as far as going on the World Bank page to find how much money was given to who was in parliament at the time to construct same project. I went as far as to say, okay, what's the solution now? What is the solution? And the citizens are clamoring for a solution. They want remedy because their livelihood is gone. People would have invested millions in the 60s to build a comfortable space, and they did get a comfortable space. They did get somewhere where it was sufficient to build on based on the building codes and directives that were given to them by same NEPA and ODPEM. But now, because you made a man-made gully on political terms, people's lives are at risk.
Very much for that. Louise, any response to what you've heard? Yeah. Because I think that you pointed to a fourth. I spoke about the 3 pillars basically, but there's a fourth one as well, because over and beyond technical aspects of the response and whatever mitigative measures are available, you have the politics. And I think we spoke about that on day one. So that's a fourth dimension that needs to be brought to bear. How in reporting, Chris, who has become a serious expert on food and agriculture and journalism, will be able to tell you that perhaps a majority of the stories that you do, there's a political dynamic at play that has to do with the balance of countries and within the region. So it's a far more complex issue than simply pointing to one. But I still assert that at the end of the day, that the storytelling experience, telling the story of the human experience, is what would dominate. As a matter of course, I don't think that the average journalist, in fact, be imbalance, if you can speak of imbalance with respect to human emotion and so on, which sometimes is separate and distinct from the science or what is in place administratively?
So that I think DRR reporting it focused a lot on the how it happened, why it happened, and how it happened. Because if you go back and you do the research, you're gonna see that there's a lot of things that weren't done, that were done badly, and that's in the majority of cases the causes of disasters.
And then it becomes a political story.
It becomes a political story.
Thank you. I don't want to repeat because I thought both your contributions were very well. Nice presentation. Clearly, the only question I really need to ask, what is government's buy-in? This is the regional government's buy-in, because everything that you said here says that there must be political buy-in. There must be a will to make this happen. I know there's a will to deal with disasters, response to disasters, because it's not in any government's interest for anything to go wrong. So the situation that the young lady talked about just now would be fixed because it's not in the interest of whoever is in power for it to happen. All right, because governments don't like to look bad. From potholes to flooding, governments do not like to look bad. So the real question here, since every single aspect of the disaster, whether it's health, education, culture, gender, right through, it comes down to political buy-in. Is there a political will within the Caribbean, within CARICOM, to deal with it?
Venture if you dare, Luis.
Keith made a point about journalists needing to do research. I can't even understand the concept of a journalist who doesn't do research. The concept it doesn't make sense. Every journalist must do research. How can you write a story without any so that don't make no sense to me, that you could even have a journalist who do research. Our work is grounded in research. That is what makes us journalists, sir. Yes, sir. Yeah. Yeah. So that part, yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Now, I mean, we can question the quality of the research and the sources and so on. We just came through a pandemic where this whole matter of source investigation and research in the public space current. Yes.
Perhaps a little off the topic here. I'm glad to hear that you mentioned that terms like act of God you don't recommend because of injustice, and I'm just putting it on record that perhaps insurance agencies and airlines can take a page out of that book, then not use act of God as an excuse to price gouge us, etc. Thank you.
Yeah, well, I think most agreements refer to force majeure now as opposed to act of God. Yeah, so that's more technically accurate. Anything more we have from the floor? Roseanne is disagreeing about the research thing. Not all journalists. I have read some articles, no research, no validation. But what's the content of the story? What is reported? Yeah, Roseanne, question. You're saying that you've seen articles where there's been no research and no validation.
Yes,
So
I am not pointing in some cases there are research where let's say, and I think we spoke about that over a couple of days, where they saw something on social media and develop a story from what they have seen on social media, but there is no official validation, right, of what was said on social media before the story is out there. So then sometimes you might have slight retraction or changes and so on. And that is what I'm saying. I know when it comes to journalism, most journalists do their things grounded in research, but disaster management itself is also another angle where you need some sort of information when it comes to the technical language, breaking down the technical language for the average man to understand and so on. Even when St. Vincent had that volcanic eruption where persons were scattering from their homes, and they weren't quite aware of what was happening. They thought the volcano was erupting and so on. We had information flooding the internet and people running with that. But then after the scientists came in, persons went back to their home. I remember writing an article in the paper. I'm not a journalist, I'm simply a lecturer, but writing on that and signifying the importance of that scientific understanding of what is happening with the volcano and getting that layman term. Even from the scientists, we were, after a while it changed, to be honest. Richie Robertson did a wonderful job, but initially it was very difficult to understand the layman terms and so on. So when I say that, sometimes not all journalists, because I know once we hear these things, we think about our specific country, our specific actions, but you have to think a little broader that you might be doing it, but others are not doing it. They are upcoming journalists, younger journalists who are not yet wet in this field, but it's a story, it's very catchy and they run with it. So that is what I'm talking about in terms of not all journalists are doing the type of research or they might be right, but the quality is not there in terms of that disaster environmental dimension.
Okay, Rosa, I think most journalists won't mind a lot of what you've said, but they'd prefer if official validation is replaced by the term verification, because official validation suggests that there's some official source that's authoritative and final, but that's not always the case, because even in the case of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, and Professor Robertson did a very good job, and in fact, he pointed to the science, but before, even with his interventions, there was a lot of misinformation being circulated that could have been avoided had there been this process of verification as opposed to seeking some official source to validate.
Agreed.
Yes, hi. I just wanted to add, I think the language is important, and the use of language by our political leaders and the way journalists use those terms is not always in sync. And either that or a lot of journalists just repeat verbatim what the politicians say. But I think it's interesting what you said, Luis, about disasters are not natural, because I've heard, the word disaster and natural almost going, being linked together all the time by people who are not necessarily experts, but people who want to give the impression that it just happens and we can't do anything about it, it's nature. So I think that's interesting, and I think that journalists perhaps could look into that a bit more deeply, and language is very, very important.
Thank you. So Luis, maybe you might want to recap this whole matter of natural disaster versus natural hazard, and the whole matter of the use of terminologies, because you did make that distinction between disaster, hazard, and I suppose you may want to speak a little bit about risk and perils.
Well, risk is the sum of vulnerability and exposition to risks, and that combination, that interaction is what could have a worse impact on a disaster. The vulnerability and what we are living in which we are living in, and the exposition to any risk creates a disaster. And as you said, hazards are natural. A hurricane is a natural phenomenon. Rains are natural phenomenon, tornadoes, not floods, because, well, floods, if we have implemented building codes effectively, we can avoid a big flooding, for example. but yeah, natural hazards are gonna happen now more than ever, and in the future more than ever, because of climate change, which is not only creating more hazards, but it's also creating more intense hazards. So it's up to governance. It's up to governance to good governance to implement strategies and plan and coordination with all sectors of our society, so those hazards do not transform into disasters.
The final questions, comments before Luis wraps. Yes, Chris, go on, repeat this.
I just wanted to ask if the UN couldn't insist, in its dealings with the governments, that the Build Back Better policy be implemented in government policies. So we don't build a bridge and build it back next year and 10 years and every year after that. Once it's rebuilt, it's done. And can't agents like yourself insist on that? The Build Back Better concept must be incorporated in government policies, regional government policies.
I'm going to take Luis off the hook, and I'm going to take Luis off the hook and respond to you. The Build Back Better concept, the also what Luis said about if you spend $1 on thing,
On
how much money
preparedness,
you will
it's up,
save,
you save
how much
$7.
will be saved, and a number of other things that Luis said. I heard this about 3 years ago. It tells me that the UNDRR or related organizations have been reaching out to a number of governments within CARICOM and having chats with them about this. I heard this in Barbados, I heard this in Dominica, and I heard this in Guyana. Okay, it's the same narrative, right? Yeah, and it's all related to climate change and whatnot, but the narrative is the same, right? Now, it tells me, and that's why I asked the question about political will, because it comes down to that. Huh? So no, so they know. So every government in the Caribbean basically is saying the same thing because they have already been briefed. Okay? They know. And that's why I say political will. Our role, I believe, is that we now have to ask more probing questions about everything. Because I'm telling you, I'm not asking you, they know.
Thank you, Sanka.
Yeah, just to add something, we work with governments, and when they ask us to work with them, the Caribbean is one of our most active subregions in the Americas and the Caribbean. We have seen a lot of progress in the Caribbean on the last few decades. But as I said, there's a long way to go. 9 of the 10 countries with more losses by disasters compared to the GDP, 9 of them are from the Caribbean. So it's something that it still needs a lot of work. But once again, we have been working with a lot of governments, and when it comes to government wills, it's up to media and journalism to ask those questions and see if they are implemented what they develop, if they are doing the right things to avoid losses and deaths. Thank you.
Okay, well, that's for Luis. Thank you very, very much, Luis. You see how much disruption you caused? Okay. Okay, yes. So we'll take a 10-minute break and then Kiran will take over from there.